I have not had a successful last year and a half. And yet the phoenix rising from the tragedy is that I have learned from it. I'm still around and I can buy groceries for the family. And, there is a learning, a lesson that I've learned in it. I don't know actually if in that lesson I'm able to succinctly express all that I learned from it. In other words, when you live it, there are intangible, inexpressible lessons that you learn that you can express some of it, but I've learned it in my heart.
Welcome to the Everyday Practices Podcast. I'm Regan Robertson, and my co-host, Dr. Chad Johnson, and I are on a mission to share the stories of everyday dentists who generate extraordinary results using practical, proven methods you can take right into your own dental practice. If you're ready to elevate patient care and produce results that are anything but ordinary, buckle up and listen in. Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome to Everyday Practices Dental Podcast. I am your host, Regan Robertson, and I am here with my ever faithful, ever jubilant, ever successful co-host, Dr. Chad Johnson. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Woohoo! Glad to be here.
You are our guest today, and last year we wrapped up in a similar fashion. We just sat down and we kind of chewed the fat on what the year has brought and wrapped it up in kind of a tidy little bow and what we're looking forward to in the next year.
Right.
And this year, we both went through business-wise a lot of changes, a lot of challenges we set ourselves up for, and we worked through those. And I'm super excited. I need to drop my voice down. I mean, I'm genuinely excited for what you're going to be sharing because it's honest and it's real and there's no filter to this.
Right. Well, and we really haven't practiced much. We just were trying to come up with problems that would be fun to talk about. And I was like, well, I've got a problem. So here's the interesting thing. The thing that I told you, I said, I've got a good start. So you were just like, well, I mean, it's not a happy ending. And I was like, no, it's not. It reminds me of what like a classic Greek tragedy is, in that it's not a happy ending, but it's worth learning about. So you could ask, why did the Greeks write tragedies? And it's just like, well, because you learn from them, and it's still a story that has emotion that you can identify with, and then stay away from the pain. So like if the story ends and he drowned, you could be like, okay, what's the take home? Don't wear handcuffs in the ocean, in the middle of the ocean. I'm just saying,
Houdini-like.
Why ever he drowned, then don't do that. Even though it's a tragedy for this person in the story, you can learn from it and be like, okay, I'm not gonna swim with sharks with a meat helmet.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think the most important thing too is you never want to give off the facade that being a productive
great.
dentist everything is great. Any business owner, and I think that is a major problem.
Yep.
In dentistry, but in all industries, is that need to project perfection, project that everything is all right, lead your team, everything just smooth sailing all the time. And we know that's not the reality.
Right.
So last year, when we were wrapping up the year, you had purchased another practice.
Right. I was about 9 months into having owned two new practices. So I was at 3 practices total.
Right. And then you also had made the dramatic decision to completely drop your insurances, right?
Right. So at that point, we were for the record, I think it was March of 2020 that we dropped all our PPOs and went fee for service, which at the time I only had Delta Premier left to drop. And that took 60 days to take effect, which we were closed for 9 weeks. So while we were closed for 9 weeks due to COVID, I sat out my 60 days of Delta, communicated and used my team to call the patients and let them know this and that, send out letters, field phone calls from the patients, send emails, send, all that stuff, trying to communicate that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And so a year ago, we were at the 9 month mark. So now we're at the 21 month mark of having closed um, off any PPOs.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I
With
did
two new
hear that
practices.
I heard that Delta is in reimbursing less this year, so the patient pays the same, but now doctors are getting reimbursed less. Is that correct?
I think it has to do with what area you're in, but that
Uh-huh.
is happening. Yes.
That's just nuts. So, you made those 2 decisions
Right.
and it's been 12 months.
Right.
What is the what problems did you encounter along the way?
Drum roll. So the thing that I wanted to talk about was my Ankeny office on the north side of town. The dentist that sold me that was working 1.5 days a week, and the types of patients that he had regarding their insurance policies um, didn't afford for me to keep many of those patients by the time that I uh, implemented my fee for service. That was quite a dramatic change for them. So to start, I think there were 150 to 200 patients.
To
Um,
start, and is that after they dropped off, or was that what you bought at?
I probably kept around 100.
Okay.
And so, in other words, it was for all the purposes of de novo.
Yes.
And then we opened up and we were doing 4 days a week. I was trying to think if it was 4.5, but let's just say Monday through Thursday. And we weren't getting the calls that we needed. We turned up our marketing. We were
Mhm.
getting calls, but then when we said, oh, yeah, we're not necessarily, in network with that insurance, it was a hang up,
Oh, almost
sound
immediately.
sometimes.
So the
And
drive radius, the patients were very used to
right.
insurance.
Yes. And so that being closed for COVID, being a new owner of, the practice, were two strikes against it. Fee for service, COVID, and being a new owner, 3 strikes. And the strikes for us, I love the location on the north side of town. There's a lot of growth
Mhm.
in Ankeny, Iowa, and I was expecting it to just be not necessarily gangbuster, but busy enough.
Mhm.
Um, and so I then had to, as we weren't getting enough patients, I had to let one of the associates go.
Now, wait.
Um,
So, did you have associates full time? Did you practice in Ankeny? What
I
was the
went,
doctor setup?
so my normal work hours for clinical
Hmm.
was 6 to noon. And then
That's right.
I would go in the afternoons to some of the different locations. So having 3 locations, my mainstay location, I would work 6 to noon. And then after 6 months of, when you're able to get ahead of your schedule, I was able to block off time to where every other week I was going between Johnston and on the west side, northwest side, and my Pleasant Hill location on the east side. So
Okay.
the north location, though, because it wasn't getting many patients, I let the associates handle that. And then I eventually would come up in the afternoons when they needed me, or stuff like that, or I would drop in, just make sure everything was going good.
Okay.
um, but yeah, I ended up not getting a lot of patients coming in. I had 2 associates working there. One was part-time, one was full-time, and we switched it to the part-time associate, going up there part-time, just because we weren't getting the appointments scheduled.
Hmm.
It blew my mind. It still does. And uh, then this September, I think it was the 29th, was September 29th, we closed the location. It was what, a year and a half in, and well, minus COVID closure.
Right.
So let's say a year and 5 or 4 months in, I decided to close it. So that's my transparent. If you want to talk about Sucktember, like Sucktember,
You closed it in September? That was
I
your
closed an
during
office in
September.
September, and it was a tough decision. But the problem was Um, if I'm sitting there at 0 an hour production per hour, as opposed to, other locations doing 1,000 plus production per hour, it's an opportunity cost issue.
Yes.
And all my time that I would spend there, it wasn't paying the bills for that location. So I would be subsidizing it by working at the other locations. Well, at some point, I should just work the other locations because I'm not able to even pay the bills at that location.
Yes.
So that's kind of the skinny of it. And there came a point when I was just like, when I set aside time to work at that north side Ankeny location, it costs me more than if I just didn't work which is ridiculously a low bar and sad, but it just was what it was.
In the autopsy of it,
Yes.
are there things that you would have maybe approached differently in purchasing a practice that you feel would have given you a better chance at saving it?
Um, I, um, so one issue was, let's pretend that that the previous doctor had zero patients,
Mhm.
um, and it was a complete de novo.
Just
Well,
gonna say,
then
so he had a building and some equipment.
yes,
Yeah.
pretty much. I mean, that's what I was buying because it was a good price. I mean, he knew it, I knew it, but and any patients there was good enough to kind of get it rolling. Um, but we dropped marketing and we would get calls. But okay, so if I were to do it differently, doing that office as a PPO office first, yes. Now, my problem is I'm stubborn enough that I don't want to do PPO. And I've joked around that I'll go into real estate before I go back into PPO dentistry. I hope I don't eat those words later down the road, but at least it's a fun joke now. Um,
Say that
and
say that again. You would go which to which?
I would like the joke that I say is I'll go because my brother does realty. So I'm like,
Uh-huh.
I'll go into real estate before I go back to being a PPO dentist.
Right.
Right. But and again, I hope I don't eat those words in 10 years and I'm like, well, I guess I'm back to being a PPO dentist. I understand too, 95+% of dentists, do some form of PPO. So I'm an outlier, but
Mhm.
I think that's where I like sitting. Furthermore, because I had three offices that the staff, the team was all in one system. It was now a fee for service system. But when I
Yes.
bought the practice, I wasn't sure that I was going to switch it just yet. But because of COVID, that was
Mhm.
when I decided all of the Veranda brand is
All
going to
in.
be right. But if it was just one office, you could switch it up and take PPO and get a ton more phone calls.
Right.
Um, and here's the funny thing: I closed the office, and I only had one or two prospective buyers. I'm hoping to have it sold here in the next couple of weeks, but
Mhm.
he's just buying it for like pennies, super cheap, basically just buying it so that way I can get out of the lease and
Uh-huh.
he can, so it it's a total loss, hundreds of thousands kind of stuff. It
Mhm.
just it's a sucky ordeal, and that's why I'm sharing it because it's neat to be able to hear neat, as a listener to be able to say I don't want that tragedy. It's just like, okay,
Yeah.
well, if you would have started at PPO as my first practice that I did, and then 15 years in is when I switched it after you've gained trust and you get decimated by the people that don't care about that trust, and then you
Mhm.
keep half of the people that are like, I trust you enough that I like this,
Right.
so they stay with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's what, but again, I marketed, so I wouldn't change that, but you do need to market. I
Mhm.
would have switched it to PPO,
Mhm.
and um we also though had a lot of staffing issues with that office, so a
Mhm.
lot of turnover with it. We've had that actually at the Johnston office
Mhm.
too. And I know that reflects poorly on me and I hate that, because COVID just made it rough that people were interested in looking elsewhere.
Mhm.
We had a lot of changes going through. We had a lot of patients that weren't necessarily coming back. So we had a high capacity. So we had to kind of shrink. That kind of made it tough too. we've just got really, I mean, some people are like, man, I'm gangbuster and I'm awesome. I'm like, I got my butt handed to me and decimated over the last, year and a half. And I'm willing to admit it. I, Chad Johnson, am willing to admit that I have not had a successful last year and a half. And yet the phoenix rising from the tragedy is that I have learned from it. I'm still around and I can buy groceries for the family.
Mhm.
And so
You
there
know,
there is a learning, a lesson that I've learned in it. I don't know actually if in that lesson I'm able to succinctly express all that I learned from it. In other words, when you live it,
mhm,
there are intangible, unexpressible, inexpressible lessons that you learn that you can express some of it, but I've learned it in my heart.
right.
And so, when someone says, give me the three take homes, it's like, well, I mean, that's good. I can give you three takeaways, but I probably have 17
Mhm.
laid down in my heart that I'm just, that I won't get burned like that again, just
Right.
because I've lived it, not just learned otherwise.
Well, walking through fire is a cliche. You physically walked through fire in
Yes.
addition to, mentally walking through fire in it. And I think it's really, I think both our personalities are really aligned where you would say something like that's neat. But I think what the biggest lesson is you are saying you are still here. You're still able to provide and function and move forward. And you took a risk, and
Yes.
business owners and leaders take risks, and walking
Yes.
through fire is the name of the game in risk taking. Not everything will work out to 100%.
Yeah,
I,
you buy Bitcoin, you might have a big payoff. You might
right.
lose everything. And I'm not even
Absolutely.
talking hypothetically in the future. I'm talking about some people that have been like, oh man, I bought high and then I sold low because I was scared. It's just like, okay, well, did you learn something from it? Because number one, that sucks. Number two, hopefully you learned so you don't do it again. And
Yeah.
yes, there was risk involved. And I think you knew that. I think I knew that,
Mhm.
buying Vicky was like, oh no, you'll be good. No, wait, no, I said that backwards. She was like, I don't know, like Chad, if you should buy two of them. I mean,
Mhm.
Patty said that, Carrie said that,
Yep.
so they were like, oh, that might be a little bit much. I'm like, nah, I'm good.
I
You
think
know,
all of us said it. And the conversation that I had with you on the beach when we were volunteering in Dominican
yeah,
Republic, when you were considering it,
I remember that.
mhm, was I'm more of a risk averse person.
Yeah,
So, I asked you kind of to anticipate some of the things you would go through, and you were very dedicated to doing it. You were very dedicated to going through it. And some of the lessons that I've seen over this past year that you take away are very powerful going forward. So I
yeah,
heard you talk about not anticipating the staff turnover. I do think COVID played a major role in that.
yep.
And I hear that enough times that I could say it's fairly common when you are acquiring a practice with existing staff, that is going to be an immediate
Oh yeah,
consideration.
yep. It happened
Uh,
at my West Side practice too.
and I also liked, I understand sitting in your shoes, how you decided to drop PPOs across the board, because one, it's easier from a messaging standpoint. It really makes it takes a stand for your core value of I am no longer doing this. So I
Right,
understood why you dropped it instead of, keeping it in, because you really couldn't anticipate at that time what that was going to do to the patient base.
right. It was a
And
burn the ships, mentality, for that. And so it was a burn the ships kind of thing to have congruency between the practices.
mhm,
Um, and I, sadly, like I had these practices set up and contracted to purchase before COVID happened. So if someone's listening, going in retrospect, well, that was dumb. Why'd you buy them? So it's like, well, that was half the problem. Is that all hit a few weeks after I signed everything into motion. So it was,
that's right.
it was already into motion. It just, yeah.
And are you kicking yourself for not having like a nest egg to float you through Ankeny and to make these adjustments, like adding PPOs back in and getting your staff aligned and going in the right direction?
Maybe I should, but I don't. I don't know, like regarding kicking myself, I
Mhm.
don't. But that's how risk averse I am. Like I sometimes joke around that I'm kind of a cockroach that when necessary, I can, I can survive the nuclear holocaust financially to work through stuff. And I'm just like, "Oh, I'll just not fill up my gas tank or no. But there are certain things that you can just draw back really tight.
Hmm.
And okay, what's my tight bill? Like there's good living, and then there's the tight living bill. It's like, okay, I've got the kids at school, I've
Hmm.
got the mortgage and groceries. Okay, here's my nut that I need to make. How can I make that happen? And I suppose just because I like the bank gave me a line of credit and that was enough to make it work.
Hmm.
And that might be dumb. Um, so there's a lesson to be learned for others, to think about, having some kind of nest egg to be able to dwindle away at. But I'm okay with how I did it. So I think
Hmm.
there's probably a curve for people. But
Absolutely. I think that the majority ends up working on that, the lack of nest egg and just going forward with it.
yep.
And we know it's not sustainable long term, but
Yeah.
it is a risk. When you said nut, it made me think of Denny Hall, our director
Yeah.
of client success. She brought in this book called Miller's Bolt. I don't know if you've read it or not.
I
I have
haven't.
not
Tell me
read it,
about it.
which we're not even supposed to talk about things we haven't read yet, but I will say the exercise that she walked our whole company through was called backing up the bolt. When things are not going the right way, or a problem isn't, it's friction and friction and friction. So she talked about, when you get a new screw and a new bolt, and you're screwing it on and it catches and it just won't go past, what do you have to do? You have to back it up a bit. And I felt that your year was a very tangible example of what happens when you get to that sticking point and it's not moving and you
Great.
can't move fast enough. Because as an owner, I want all of you listeners that have multiple practices to understand and give yourself grace, Chad. It's easy to diagnose on paper and say, oh, well, I just should have brought PPOs back. Oh, I should
Yeah.
have, done this and
Oh,
that.
he's dumb. He should have done those three things and it would have
Right.
worked. It's like, yeah.
Right. But you're also a practicing dentist. You're also managing two other practices. You're also a husband and a father and on the school
Coach.
board and a coach and all these other elements. And I
Right.
know my day is disciplined to a T, hour by hour, so that I
Right.
can try to my best to fulfill everything.
Right.
So, so in that, what is the result that has happened? You are shutting down that practice, and where are you at today?
So more clarity in where my productivity comes from.
Mhm.
And I don't foresee myself buying any new practices ever or anytime soon. Um, I mean, listen, I'm not saying it's bad for other people to do. That's
Right.
not my point, but I've learned, okay, the two that I have going are really good. Furthermore, the west side and north side practice, the two newer ones that I bought, were two different case studies. And so they gave me extremes. One had 1,600 patients that were fee for service the last 50 years with this doctor.
Mm.
And the other one had been open for, 2 or 3 years and had just few handfuls of patients. And the doctor was only there a day and a half a week. Um, One was, had an established computer system, and the other one was all analog, and so I had to upgrade all that. So everything that was positive about the one was negative about the other, and we would sit around and talk about, so why are we going to buy the west side practice or the north side practice? And we thought honestly that the north side ankeny practice was going to destroy uh, the you know the west side practice as far as the financial outcomes and everything like that
Wow.
it was going to. And it turns out that it was the other way around. So um all for the record, I thought that the Johnston practice, I think it was the majority of my team that was just like, no, the Ankeny one's going to be where it's at. We don't know if you should buy the Johnston one. And I was like, I think the Johnston one's going to do well, but I also like this opportunity for the North Side one. That's kind of how it happened. Um,
Wow.
Take home lessons altogether, though. Yeah. So now I'm more resolute in working where I'm working to fix teeth, help people, and not be sitting around. Sitting around is okay when you're investing in the long term, but I'm like, listen, I mean, I'm not just out of school and
Right.
hungry. I'm like, I've got work to do.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think that's it.
Well, I like that. Actually, that was the answer I kind of was assuming that it would be. Is I'm going, I'm going back into this all in, where I'm really focusing
Yeah.
on dentistry, and I'm going to focus on the two practices that are running well,
Yes.
and I'm going to celebrate that fact. Do you think? Do you think you got like just really not? I don't know if grandiose is the right word. You just like decided like I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to get the 3, and then I'm going to get 5, and then I'm going to get 10
Yep.
practices. You
Yep.
did feel that way,
Yep.
and the result is now you're like, whoa. Not only am I going to go back and just really do well. Like Bruce only had one practice and he killed it, and he does talk to that a lot. I've heard him say, "I just do the one." And you just said, I don't think I'll ever buy another practice. Do you really think you'll just stay with the 2?
Yep. But part of the problem of today's answer is uh, the economy as a
Mhm,
whole, inflation,
mhm.
hiring practices, COVID. All this stuff was not a thing when I first was
It
looking at
has
getting
it
this done. So, I
it
mean, there's
has
been
been
a lot
flipped
of,
upside down. That's
yes, a lot
true.
of world changes.
Yeah.
So, if I could go back to an earlier economy and earlier administrative helps, etc.,
Yes.
then that would change the scenario. But you do have to roll with reality.
To be adaptable,
And
flexible.
the way that I see it, I'm just like, listen, I mean, every year is another year lost of opportunity to, kill it for your family, for your legacy, for, your retirement, for, who, in essence, who you're volunteering for. Because when we're generous and we give money away or time away, or any of our resources, it's at the cost that we've already banked up.
Mhm.
And so, like, if you want to be generous with your money, then you still have to think about, okay, well, you could have been more generous if you weren't sitting around at an office that's not doing anything. It's just like, that's not doing anybody any good.
Right.
If it's about helping patients and making, the team be able to make their, payroll and
Mhm.
their goals, not just financially, but, in helping patients, and therefore you get financially rewarded as a business and as an owner for that risk. I'll tell you what, I didn't get rewarded for that north side practice as far as the risk payoff. I got spanked, and it taught me a lesson,
Mhm.
just like, this is old school, but it's like, just like a good old fashioned spanking should do. It should teach you a lesson that you don't go the next day and do the same dumb thing again,
Right.
and get in trouble for it, and get spanked yet again. It's just like, well, you didn't quite learn that. It wasn't that you didn't. that's that's not that's not smart. Or I should say, that's not wise. That's
Right.
not wise.
Do you feel like you can control your philosophy of care with associates easier in, well, that's just kind of a dumb question, isn't it? You can control your philosophy of care easier if you have less practices to bounce from.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
that's another big issue that we didn't even address today. We'll have to address that in the next episode, because that's
for sure.
really,
Stay
really
tuned for
important.
2022.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, I am going to close this out because I know in less than T minus 5 minutes, you are preparing to fly away.
Yes, that was the Phoenix reference, just in case anyone wondered when I, that I said
Oh, is that what that was?
yes.
You should
So
put your virtual background up,
that's right.
because now we are switching hats. You are going to take time with your family.
Uh-huh. Let's see if I can find it.
Of course, you can find it, and it's always in your. That's not the right one. Is that from your area?
Yes, this was from a snowstorm a year or two ago. So enjoy that. Let's get back to, I don't know if whatever. There it is. There's the bay I'm going to. Boom.
Oh, that looks
So
beautiful. Oh,
mhm.
well, Merry Christmas, Chad.
Yes, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to
Merry
you
Christmas to
and to
all of
all
our
the listeners.
listeners.
Jinx.
I got to buy you a Coca-Cola.
Right.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of Everyday Practices, a dental podcast. And
Yeah.
leave us some feedback. Give us a review on iTunes if you enjoy what you're hearing. If you don't enjoy what you're hearing, email me directly, Regan, Regan, at productivedentist.com. That's
Or they
Regan.
can email me at no, I'm just
Stop.
kidding.
We really want to know what type of topics you want us to cover in 2022. So I really do reach out. Please reach out, say hello, and let us know what you think and what you'd like to hear. And we look forward to serving you in 2022. So
That's
Merry
right.
Christmas, everybody. That's
Thanks,
a wrap.
everybody. Later.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Everyday Practices Podcast. Chad and I are here every week thanks to our community of listeners just like you. And we'd love your help. It would mean the world if you can help spread the word by sharing this episode with a fellow dentist and leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify. Do you have an extraordinary story you'd like to share or feedback on how we can make this podcast even more awesome? Drop us an email at podcast@productivedentist.com. And don't forget to check out our other podcasts from Productive Dentist Academy at productivedentist.com/podcasts. See you next week.